Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, March 14th meeting of the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission and begin by introducing our newest commission member, Mike Nelson. And maybe, do you know everybody at the table?
No, I don't.
Maybe we should just do a quick round and then viewers can.
Go that way first.
Mike Ray from the city, and I'll let you go from there.
No, Mike.
Kurt Obermeyer.
Kurt, glad to meet you.
Ann Zavala, and I'm your council liaison.
Joel Hamilton, I'm a member of this commission and also a member of the Transportation Commission.
Victoria Seaver, this commission, and Sustainable Environment Commission.
Wendy McClure, this commission, and Historic Preservation Commission.
Rob Parrish, I only have one commission.
Smart. Okay. So the first item is approval of the minutes from February 28th. Any additions, corrections, deletions?
Corrections?
Yes. Victoria.
4.
Okay.
So under 3, Transportation Commission meeting, McClure encouraged commissioners to sign up for Transportation Commission meeting notifications, and then again, it says toward the end, commissioners were encouraged to sign up for Transportation Commission meetings notifications, so I'd say strike the first one, keep the second one. That's what I did.
Okay.
It doesn't need to be there twice.
And it might have come from Mike the second time, but I don't know. Okay, yes.
And then I, under 5, toward the third from the end of the paragraph, city proposes the action should be a comma because it's a clause. And under shared reading, the clause again on the third sentence, after to Moscow, comma, it could likely affect it with the comma.
I've lost you. Wait a second. On the back page.
With the shared reading,
Oh,
third
okay.
sentence.
Okay.
So Moscow and it need to be separated with
Oh,
a comma.
gotcha.
And then halfway through, it says she thought the most positive development examples, not she though the most development. Just left off the T.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I just must read right through this. Like things that Hawkeye to catch them.
They jump out.
Yeah. So, anybody else or anybody ready to move approval with technical corrections, et cetera?
Yep, I move we approve the minutes.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Actually, I'll abstain since I was absent.
Okay. Okay, so 2 abstain, and I suppose since you weren't here. Although we have a few meetings ago, or maybe a few years ago, we decided that if you read the minutes, even if you missed the meeting, and you feel comfortable with them, you're welcome to participate in approving them. So it's not obligatory that you abstain. So anyway, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oh, I guess we did this. Abstentions. Apologies. Okay.
Those minutes are twice as good.
Yeah. They're nailed down. Must be that peanut butter cookie is really good. Okay, so correspondence. Any correspondence from staff?
Nothing from staff.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Transportation Commission meeting report. Joel, do you have any updates
Transportation
for us?
Commission meeting met last week, Thursday. There were 2 items which should be of interest to this commission. One was a proposed revision to the University of Idaho parking district. The University of Idaho has an agreement with the city by which the university can control permits on some of the public streets on campus. And the proposal was to expand the district to take in a couple more areas on the east side. A portion of College Street and a portion of Railroad Street. Railroad Street runs north and south north from the transit center. There are currently some uncontrolled parking places, I believe, on both sides of Railroad Street. The College Street to the west of the intersection with Railroad Street has in the first block some uncontrolled parking areas. It's not part of the area the city patrols. And there is some uncontrolled parking in the first block to the east of Railroad. After discussion, there's apparently a need for more permit parking, especially for some of the residents, and there's a fair number of residents and apartments and Greek houses in the neighborhood. From the city, from the university's perspective, having access to more permittable parking spaces makes sense. The commission was a bit concerned about the block to the east of College Street, and since we didn't think that the proposal necessarily would, if we approved part of it, it doesn't preclude the possibility of expanding it later. So our recommendation to council was the approval of the expansion to include Railroad Street and the block to the west of the intersection with Railroad Street. And the other action that the commission considered was what's currently essentially a one-way couplet between Almond Street and Asbury Street. Almond Street is essentially one way to the north. Asbury Street is essentially one way to the south, except for one block on Almond, just to the south of 3rd Street, where access to adjacent properties require about 150 feet of two-way traffic. The problem is a block further north. The site where the old, I guess they were P elevators, which is now essentially an empty field. There are proposals for development of that property, which would involve mixed use, residential and a bit of commercial. And it's preferable not to have access to it off of A Street, which is quite busy. Access to it off of Asbury or Almond would require some two-way traffic. So the proposal was to, again, have basically 150 feet or so, 200 feet maybe, of Almond become two-way, but keep the one-way through the rest of the length of Almond. It would provide better access to 1st Street, which comes to the east off of Almond, sort of halfway down. So the proposal would be to have the two-way extend from A Street down to 1st. And it made sense to the commission, and we recommended, or we passed on our approval to council. Any questions about either of those?
Anybody? Well, thank you. And also, I don't know if Mike knows this, but Mike Nelson, but the city has us now sign up for notifications. Did they tell you about that?
Yep.
And among them, we have the option of also signing up for notifications about Transportation Commission, and I got my first bing. There it is, notification. So, and thank you, Joel. That's helpful. Okay. Item 4 is public comment. It's an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the commission regarding matters that aren't before our agenda tonight or currently pending before us. Is anybody interested in coming up and talking to us during the public comment period? Okay. Well, once again, it's an opportunity. Let's see. Item 5. Considerations for developing very tiny homes. Nils Peterson is going to give us a presentation on this.
Let me get a jug of water started here first.
Okay, excellent. It's mud season, I'm getting used to it.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah.
I wrestled back and forth, and I'm going to try to use the term very small,
Okay.
and not tiny.
Okay.
Tiny has baggage,
Right. I would agree with you.
of various kinds of baggage. I'm Nils Peterson. I'm the executive director for the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust. And for the last 4 years, I have been working on the puzzle of how to create affordable home ownership in Moscow. So when I heard that the commission was interested in very small houses, I thought I should take an opportunity to really push what I knew pieces of and try to bring it all together and come up with some sort of a summary overview. So I really appreciate this opportunity. I was explaining to my daughter, getting ready, and actually I'm kind of excited to be here. It seems like a dissertation defense. A number of the people who have taught me are here, and I think I've pushed this a little further than perhaps you have, and we'll see if you think I did a good job. So, part of the origins of this were about a year ago, the Housing Trust was in the process of selling its second house. It's over on Morton Street, and the price was $165 for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 1,000-square-foot house. And I was quite pleased with myself, and I was saying on Facebook, you know, here's this affordable house. And I got some blowback. And the blowback was that $165,000 is not affordable. And I guess I caught myself before taking offense. I said, so what is affordable? Let's figure this out. And I got several answers. The Facebook community is, you know, eclectic. The price of a new Subaru. So I thought, okay, what's the most tricked out? I haven't been to the Subaru dealer for a while, but the most tricked out high-end Subaru, maybe you get to $50,000. I don't know. And another answer was that I could pay it off in 5 years, which again, that might be the Subaru. It might be a way of getting a handle on a dollar amount. $1,000 a month for 5 years, $60,000 kind of thing. And then I got this one. I thought, okay, that's something that maybe we can work with. I think that number is going to be a little bit bigger, but it's still going to seem pretty digestible to folks. And importantly, for the purposes of this, it's likely to produce a very small house. So just some quick run through of definitions, legal definitions on ways to own a house: real property, stick-built on site, or a factory-built modular that goes on a real foundation, mobile homes and RVs. And the implications here are really important. The difference between personal and real property has implications for lending rules, insurance, treatment by the zoning code, whether the asset appreciates or depreciates, and taxes. It turns out that each of those could qualify for a homeowner's exemption. I had a nice chat with Pat Vaughn about this, and he was quite helpful, and he thought all of them could qualify, though he wasn't sure that they could exist. For example, the RV limits in city are 6 months per residence in it, so you couldn't really be your permanent resident. So here's the case study that I did. And now, again, the Housing Trust is focused on ownership. So you would come up with a different answer potentially if you said, I want to build some very small houses for rental. a very small house to buy. Within the city, fee simple ownership, and without a homeowners association. That's just going to be another set of expenses for my buyer who's trying to swap rent for their house. Not a condo. The complexities from the housing trust standpoint of buying and selling condos make condos less attractive for particularly first-time buyers. Certainly not an ADU. That's not an ownership model that we have, other than it's behind the big house kind of ownership model. Real property. Solves some of the lending and insurance issues. It solves the understanding of will it appreciate or not. You'll also see that I'm focused on development by right. I don't want to do a PUD. And the reason that I don't want to do a PUD is I don't want to take this novel idea and then get to go to a public meeting where a whole lot of people will come out and say, this is going to ruin my property values. So I'm looking for a solution that doesn't require a PUD. Conventionally financed purchase by the homeowner. Got to be able to walk into a bank and buy it. And the last one, which is not a constraint that I face at the Housing Trust, we're a nonprofit, but if this could be a for-profit development, then I could be out of business, which would be good, and it would take off. If it depends on a nonprofit to do all the work, the chances of expanding this are smaller. So here's what all I explored. I explored a tax assessment, homeowner exemption, insurance, zoning, land cost, construction cost, the mortgage loan, and the appraisal issues. 3 ways that Pat Vaughn could come up with a value for it. He saw absolutely no problem. Either the sales price itself, documented costs, or putting it into the kind of models that they use to model all the properties in the county using various features of the property. So then I took a trip over to State Farm, plopped down and said I want to get homeowners insurance for my approximately 300 square foot house. That was my opening, I've iterated this. My opening guess is it's 300 square feet. We walked through all the sort of valuation stuff, and she said, yes, we will write you a policy. It seems to be that you can't get cheaper than $21 a month, but we'll write a policy for that. So then I thought, okay, now I got to get the money side going. This is the market rate, the fair market rent for Latah County for this year, $565 a month for a 1-bedroom unit. Again, small house. And I took a trip to my friends at Wells Fargo, and I said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you my payment, you tell me how much I borrowed, which is kind of working the bankers backwards. This chart is interesting if you want to know so then her first question back, Rachel's, was, what's your credit score? And this makes an interesting example. If you look at percentage rate, you'll see that as your credit score goes up, the rate goes down. And if you look at the mortgage insurance, you'll see that it gets radically cheaper. So it's an object lesson in having a good credit score. For those 2 credit scores, those 2 numbers basically straddle the 565 number. So we now know what we're going to do. We're going to purchase the house valued at $80,000 with a 3% down. And we're going to make a payment that's equivalent to the rent on a 1-bedroom. So here we go. Now how big is this house really going to be? Let's determine the design. Start from the $80,000, and remember I said it's a for-profit model, so take off 10% arbitrarily, 10% for the profit for the developer. And then I went into the city, and in a little while I'll show you the design that I took into the city. I waltzed into the city and said, I want to pull a building permit for a very small house. Nobody blinked, they just said, okay, and looked at my drawing and gave me a quote for the building permit, $7,950. Okay, write that down. Now let's figure out what the land is likely to cost.
Yeah, did that include sewer hookups and water?
Sewer hookup, water hookup, review of my design plans, the rest of the permitting. This is the full meal deal. 10% of my project cost. So you recall my various things, zoning considerations. I want to work in R4 because the lot sizes are smaller. Single-family, twin home, townhouse lot sizes there. 2-car parking is required, and you'll note the issues there. And then those are the setbacks. So one of the rubs that I find is that those 3 sizes, 5,000, 4,500, and 5,400, are not modular or related to one another. So a lot that might be efficient for one use is not necessarily efficient for another use. That's the size of my house. And this, the 20 feet front setback, 20 feet rear setback, and maybe a 20-foot deep building is 60 feet. The lot, I might have a lot of unneeded land in the back of the lot, conceivably. We're going to see that in a second. So let's continue to work on the cost of a lot. I found a very interesting lot. It's on North Asbury Street. It is 20 feet wide, 125 feet deep. It's got a house on it. And that's the tax assessor's information about the house. The improvements are valued at $67,000, the land at $36,000. And with the homeowner exemption, the taxable value $51,000, whatever it is, $6,000. I can't read from here. Let's keep in mind that assessed tax value of $51,000, because that's going to be important at the end of our story. So you could build, by right, if I understand you right, Mike, I could demolish what's there and build a 10-foot wide building with 5-foot setbacks.
The candidate for a variance.
Candidate for variance, what's there is a bit more generous than that. Its eaves don't drip on the property lines, but could if the wind was blowing. The reason I found this lot was I was looking across the street at this spacious lot over here, which is 40 feet wide, because in my feed I got here's a inexpensive house for sale at 162, and if you can see in the orange circle, it's 792 square feet, and the basic house is sort of turn of the last century. So it's an old house, it's a small house, it's valued at 162, which is a little bit more than the price of a Subaru. Continuing with cost of a lot, trying to think what it might cost. This is the cheapest lot for sale today in the MLS in Moscow, $34,500. Challenging. Somebody needs a good architect and a deep pocket to work on that site. So here is another one. 503 East 8th Street sold last summer. It sold for $107,000 with a 100-year-old house on it that needed to be demolished. So I estimated that maybe rounded up to $120,000, including the demolition. And then along Harrison Street, 120-foot width, take off the 2 setbacks, divide by 18 foot, the narrowest you can make in an R4 zone for a house, you get 5 units. So rearrange the property lines so that there are 5 lots that run east-west, some of them very skinny. Divide the 120,000 by the 5 units, get $24,000 per new lot. Plus, there are public improvements that were needed to Harrison, curb gutter, sidewalk, and some work on the 8th Street sidewalk, if I recall. So there's going to be more than $24,000 a lot by the time you get done. The other way to look at it, and here comes back to my comments about deep lots, the 15,000 square feet divided by the 1,800 square feet required for a minimum lot for a townhouse. You could get 8 units on there. But I couldn't solve the geometric problem to figure out how to fit 3 more units on unless I could imagine a way to use the alley as a public right-of-way, and we don't allow that in our current zoning code. So there's more potential for that lot if the rules were different. Here's the most promising one, exploring this. This is up on Residence Street. The street right now kind of peters out to nothingness. It's actually topographically challenged to the point I don't think you could do this. They're asking 45. needs public street improvements. But you could fit 7 units of townhouse on there, again, 18 feet wide. The lots would chop it up north to south into little strips, set back 20 feet. This is a front-loaded site, so you would have to put the parking in the front, and that's going to be a significant burden on that front yard. Basically, the whole front yard of each of those units is going to be parking. Implications that it'll all be curb cut, so there'll be no street parking. I mean, it's not ideal. Okay, so summary of land cost. I think the very best case you could hope for right now in Moscow for a lot would be around 10,000, and that's because you found something and were able to creatively divide it up. Hope for 25,000 a lot, and 35,000 is crazy. So here we go. I drop my 25,000 into my thing, subtract, and I get the remainder for the building, $39,050 to build my building with. So what is the construction cost? I went looking for modular homes. I'll just truck one in, drop her down. Wasn't an exhaustive search, but the best that I found was this, 560 square feet for $93,000. Then I went and looked at these. Park model RVs are RVs that are meant to be parked. They're not RVs that are meant to be RV'd. So they drive it to the site and they park it. It's sort of a mobile home, but the mobile home industry didn't want to deal with them. So they get a license plate. This has got a chance. There's one that fits in my budget if you bought it on sale, and so does that one. Notice the size. We're talking about 400 square foot kinds of things, and it only works if we get it on sale. So, cost per square foot. The modular, 167, the RV park model, 133 or 93 if you got it on sale. Those include, there will be transportation on top of that. Our experience building the house on Morton Street, and admittedly it's a more energy efficient house, we were at 135 for a small house. So then I had the thought, I'll call up the city, say, hey, when you do a building permit, what do you put in as the value per square foot for the construction? Because that's part of their formula. They go 114. So I thought, okay, maybe a very small house is more expensive to build because it's very small, extra fiddling around, or maybe it's cheap to build because it's very small. The electrician comes out on his lunch hour and does the job, kind of thing. So I'm going to pick 114. That may be optimistic. Okay, so now we stick the 114 in as our divisor, and we get 342 square feet for the house size. And don't forget, we got that parking there, which is about the same size as our house. This will make the architects in the room squirm. This is the house that I designed on a second or third iteration. It was good enough to pull a building permit. Not to pull it, just to get the pricing on it.
No, you can't have a toilet going right onto a kitchen, so it doesn't work.
Well, I'm here to tell you, actually, you can. I recommend a really thick door.
And you see, I didn't create a bedroom in here either. At any rate, that was the design that I waltzed in to price my building permit with. And a reminder that that's what it costs. I was sent to Boise on a mission, and I woke up in the morning and I realized this hotel suite is about the same size. Now, I didn't go equipped with tape measures to actually measure it out, but I think it was 16 by 22. And this is the view of the living room and bedroom. That's the view of the front door of the kitchen, and my suitcase is on the dining room table. My briefcase is in the living room. And that's the view of the entertainment center and the closets to the right behind it and the bathroom way back in the corner. My daughter says you have to go into that bathroom backwards. But there it is. It's a one-bedroom house and 352 square feet. So I wanted to find out if there really was a lender. And again, I went to Wells Fargo because I have some other relationships there with the lending people. Rates and fees, would you actually write me a loan? Would FHA rules allow such a thing? She thought FHA would, but let's use conventional financing if we can. Any other type of property, mobile home or something, would have other rules and challenges. I got a good enough answer from a commercial bank that I didn't go to a credit union. The challenge, however, is how are you going to get this appraised? Because there are no comps on the market for anything like this. So solving the appraisal challenge, typically it requires comparable sales. So the developer could finance the first few sales themselves. That would create comps. And then beyond that, there would be a supply of them out there for appraisers to work from. Maybe a buyer is well enough heeled to self-finance, or borrows against something else. And then, I don't know, but some alternative financing that uses some alternative way of establishing a value, perhaps. So, conclusions and questions. The most important one to me in this is that first one. You'll recall last summer I was here to talk to you about a preliminary plat that I was working on. And I worked you through a fairly extensive example of the potential tax revenue generated from the different lots in the plat, focusing on the relatively higher yield of the small lots, small in terms of linear feet of street. And my focus was that we pay for street, both for street maintenance, snow plowing, sweeping, all those things, by the linear foot. And when we have to rebuild streets, which we do every 30 to 40 years, we pay for that by the linear foot. So the wider the lot, the more lineal feet that lot has to support in taxes. What you saw me proposing to design were 18-foot wide lots, and then put on properties that, if they're owner-occupied, are going to have exceedingly low taxable values. Will those taxable values, on that same 18-foot wide lot, you could put a $190,000 house. There would be no restriction in the zoning code from building a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2.5-story tall house, which would have a much higher value, which from the city's standpoint would have a higher taxable yield than from the very, very small house. So I think that that's a significant question to think about, and perhaps there are ways around it in terms of finding more value per linear feet of street by doing some other things. So the zoning consideration, could we make the lots somehow smaller or the setbacks somehow different? And I'm focused not so much on density per se, but value per linear feet of road. So a house, as you recall in the Spokane examples, they were doing essentially ADUs, condoizing the lot, having a new house in the back. That would add value to that street frontage, to that width, and be a different way of handling that space. So if you were only required to face a pedestrian right-of-way rather than a street, some of you have been here long enough to remember Indian Hill's 6 plats coming through, and at one time there was a pedestrian right-of-way, I think, right there, where those lots from the lower street and the upper street all line up at a corner. And as that was coming through P&Z, I was looking at it thinking, you buy the lots adjacent to the yellow line, you turn the houses to face in, you end up with a walking street. Could be some interesting possibilities there. That also might increase the taxable value per linear foot of street because you could get more stuff, quote, in the back. Or is there a way to think about less public infrastructure? You recall on the Residence Street site if the whole front is curb cuts, then there can't be a parking lane where those curb cuts are. So could we build the street narrower as a result? Or is there some other way to think about shifting around the kind of infrastructure that we build there if the value of the houses is so much different? And then just thinking about, from a zoning standpoint, the minimum parking requirement, my one-bedroom house having 2 cars required as the minimum for houses, just makes the land use and the land character challenging. Question that I can't answer is who would buy a 350 square foot house for $80,000? For $100,000, you could go buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bath condo over on Baker Street or somewhere else in town. Now it's a condo on Baker Street, but it's, maybe a lot more house for the dollar. So could these houses be designed so that they grow later? My mother grew up during the Depression living in a garage. The people who had bought the lot and started to build a house built a garage first. They built it as a habitable space. They went broke. They rented the garage. They had intended to live in the garage and build the house, and ultimately use the garage for garage. So that's a sort of a thought about, are there ways to start with this tiny house, get your toe in the ground, all the utilities on the site, and then somehow grow it? Or is a different way that this very small house becomes the ADU to a future house? A different strategy about growing. So I want to leave you with the thought of a couple of shared readings. We need small homes from strong towns, if you were to Google that phrase. He's exploring the idea of building wealth over time. Rather than the way we build subdivisions now, we build it to absolutely its final state. It's as big a house as you can fit on the smallest lot that you can have, and there isn't a lot of chance to think about it evolving forward. Whereas if you look in some of our older neighborhoods, houses have been added onto, they've been changed, they've been intended in some sense to grow. The other is an article on half-built houses. And it doesn't mean incomplete in the one sense of half-built. Some of them are full gables with only a house under half, and there's air under the other half of the gable. The idea is, again, that the residents get in and get started, and the circuit breaker box is there, the water's there, everything is there. It's a finish the basement notion on a bigger scale. So convert the other half of this shell into the living space that you want. A core of stuff is in the half that was built for you and that you purchased. So you might find those two as interesting readings to think about this incremental growth of houses from smaller to larger. Thank you.
Thank you, Nils. Are there any questions for Nils? Yes.
I'm looking at the list, and obviously what you want to do is minimize the negative impact of whichever those that you can. And I'm looking at that very first one, generate enough tax revenue, and I recall, and I wished I could remember the details, but we talked with Les McDonald about the relationship between lot widths and generation, tax revenue generation, and its impact on the maintenance for the streets. And my recollection is that he was telling us that there is no relationship. So the tax revenue generated by these small lots is not a consideration for street maintenance. Now, I may have...
I remember something like that too. And
so if you could take that one off the list, you got one of your problems partially solved.
I would like to understand what he was saying, because I started from Tyler Palmer. Tyler gave me price per foot to do various things. And my observation was on the plat last summer, the narrow lot I could get a $180,000 house on. going up to a single family, it was part of a townhouse. Going up to a single family, I had to get significantly wider, and it was less credible that I would get twice as much value in the house that was on the wider lot.
You know, and I remember your conversation about it, and it made complete sense. But then when Les came in and talked about it, he was saying that those were not related issue. How he budgets for maintenance is not related in any
frontage.
sense to the frontage.
Yeah.
So,
But how he budgets for maintenance, I can believe that. But how the city gets tax income, if on an 18-foot wide lot, you've only got an $80,000 house with a homeowner's exemption, so you're getting taxed on 40, that's going to be a very different yield to the city's coffers.
but I think he was, and I'm sorry, I don't remember all the details, but I think he was not looking at it on that lot by lot basis. It was, because you're gonna have some lots that are generating way more tax revenue than just for that spot of street that's in front of it. So he's looking at it as a whole,
As a whole.
as opposed to just those houses. All I'm saying is that maybe that isn't as big an impediment to being able to move forward as you think, and so it lets us kind of get into viewing some of these other issues.
And nothing would stop, other than money won't work, I don't think. Nothing would stop me building either of those two designs that I showed up there, the 5-unit or the 7-unit.
Right.
By right today. Whether it's good for the city from a tax standpoint or not,
Well,
you know, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the question to mull over. I have one thought, Les has a different one, but the zoning code would permit it to happen.
right. And it's probably a broader discussion than just how much tax revenue is gonna get generated. I mean, there's goals that the city is attempting to achieve, and we're spending
Right.
time talking about it as a commission.
Right.
So I like to think that we wouldn't make a decision based on, or discourage moving forward with this particular concept just because we didn't think it would generate enough tax revenue. I mean, it's important, I'm not
Right.
dismissing it entirely, but that's my 3 cents worth.
Yep, thank you.
I think one of the sticky wickets is gonna be to get that square foot build price.
Anywhere near 114.
Yeah.
Yep,
It would be
that's what worries me.
really hard. I guess it strikes me as being so hard it would be fairly impossible. One book I read talked about, building small houses. And, well, it was with an emphasis on cheaper houses. And he said that building techniques these days are usually good enough when you're talking a small house, so you're not talking cathedral ceilings and you're not talking the 3 skylights and stuff. He said it brings it down to you have to squeeze everywhere, which, like, one of their suggestions was you cantilever off of a concrete foundation.
Make a
as much as
smaller
you can.
foundation.
Right, so that you get that extra, or 4 foot less of foundation and things like that. And he said the reality is that when you start squeezing the price like that, you're gonna do it at $800 at a time, not, figuring out something that you can take 5,000 off the price.
Well, generally, unfortunately, you still need a bathroom, you still need a kitchen.
Yep.
And those are the most expensive per square foot pieces of a house, and
Yep.
proportionately, they become a higher ratio, so then it becomes more expensive per square foot, and that's one issue. It's interesting, because in the last year, I've worked on designs on 2 houses, one at 480 square feet, remodeling that, and the other 320 with a small addition to get, and that 320 was an historic shell that then we added a small bedroom and with a loft space in the addition, so that captured another. But it's 350 is almost not livable. you know, it's really small. I mean, these places are small that I'm talking about too. You could barely fit a queen. You can only fit a queen size bed in the 480 square foot house in one place. And you have to have a separation, at least in the code jurisdictions I've worked in, between a bathroom and a kitchen. You can't have it going directly onto it. So it takes intense design. You get down to worrying about every inch. Mm-hmm. And I spent the last year just thinking about inches for those two projects, and it's challenging. It seems like when people get into that sort of ratio of buying capacity, is it worth not just being in the rental market? That would be my question, and it's a hard question to ask, but I think we have to ask it.
Right. In many respects, my conclusion from this exercise is P&Z shouldn't spend a whole lot of time worrying about any of the issues that this raises, because you can't build it for 114. It's already so incredibly small. It's who would buy it? I could not tell myself any story of a buyer unless it was actually part of a plan to make something else, and this was the way you got your foot in the door.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the concept of houses that grow, and wondering exactly what kind of policy alternatives there are. It seems that today any development that includes pre-built homes or developer-built homes is pretty much maxing out. So, I bought a house on an oversized lot, and it's grown several times. Mm-hmm. And but that's because it was a older lot. Mm-hmm. And it's houses that grow perhaps are a thing of the past, and why?
Debbie Spurgeon said to me early on in this saga, you can't put a cheap house on an expensive lot. Which I wondered about for a long time, but from the builder's standpoint, the lot is a cost. The profit is in what you've marked up, the improvement that you put on it. Yeah. And you just need a ratio there of relatively, 4-to-1, 5-to-1 kind of improvement value to dirt value. And so it leads to small lots of big houses.
As a purchaser back in my pre-children era, I might have bought the small house on a expensive lot with the expectation of doing some of the kinds of things I've done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but nobody's building them.
Yeah, that's what I would think about that, is because from a developer's standpoint, yeah, you bet you want to put the most house you can on this lot because that's how you make the most money. But from an owner's viewpoint, mm-hmm. that's a whole different thing. If being able to get it for $40,000 cheaper is the most important thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the owner may not care. The land and house ratio is this way or this way. Mm-hmm. It's the total that they care about.
Yeah.
But yes, how do you get it there?
Yeah.
Well, you buy the large lot and you
lot
build your own first house.
And that's just kind of what was going through my mind. Back in late 60s, early 70s, even into the 80s, kit houses were kind of a popular thing where you would buy it and then build it yourself. And maybe it's a question of finding the right customer that might be willing to do something like that, or somebody that Joel is describing that would want to expand at some point in time, and maybe there's an intersection of what might be the right person and the affordability.
I mean, that would be one of the only ways you could really get the construction price way down, is is do some kind of a
Own labor for a chunk of it.
off-site, literally kit build, or, Wassenkerry can pretty much move anything. If you just have a crew that slaps together 30 of them somewhere off-site and then truck them in and put them on as small a foundation as you can get away with. But I like the other thought, though, about, it would be just returning to the way things are done, that you buy a small house with the plan that if things go well, you add on.
Add the kid, add the bedroom.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you have a couple of good years, we get a dining room.
But then it really impacts how you subdivide the
Yeah.
land. I mean, if you're gonna do this as a,
Yeah.
in something in the spirit of the cottage ordinance or whatever, you gotta make sure you're gonna be able
Yeah.
to really do that.
And that's, the land here is so expensive too, that, whether or not you can sink that amount of money into a big enough lot when you are squeezing, when you're making the decision to buy an $80,000 house instead of a townhome you could get for $100,000?
Condo.
Condo.
Condo, you could find some condos in Moscow right now for around 100.
Yeah. But then you can't grow there.
Buy the condo next to you.
Yeah. Punch out a wall. Yeah. But that is one thing you get that you don't get with a condo, is you get a lot
Yes,
with this.
right.
So that can make a difference. I mean, one of the things I think too is it really is true. That's how family wealth gets built, is by real estate. Where you get incredibly lucky in one form or another.
Both there's the buying it and then just the straight, but then there's the Joel story. I added a room, we didn't have a garage and now we do, and all that incremental building of wealth leverages further.
Yep.
So I have a question, and I have no idea what the answer is, but back in the day, people built their home and they stay here forever. I mean, we're in a very transitory world these days. So is somebody going to care about having a little tiny house and want to build it, or are they going to be on down the road before that ever happens?
Yeah, that's a good, is it worth having for 5 years?
Yep. Well, I have heard the tale of students' parents that end up buying them something for the 4 years that they're here,
They do.
and then they sell it on when they graduate. So it's not out of the question.
Well, and usually there's more affordability in houses that are already built that are old. I mean, like you showed that example, that per square foot, they actually cost less than new construction generally. So.
Yeah. But then I would, you have to fold in the heat bill and a few other things, and then all the magical things that are involved in living in a 100-year-old rental.
But it might probably cheaper than a dorm room.
Certainly more pleasant than a dorm. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, can we talk about this for the next 2 hours?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, thanks,
Definitely,
Mills.
yeah, thanks,
That
Mills.
was really
It's-
interesting.
It is. Yeah, it raises a lot of questions, more questions than answers right now, for sure. So what are you going to do with this next? I guess that would be my question for you.
I don't see a path forward to build something that small. And so I'm struggling. I mean, from a standpoint of building something affordable, my target demographic is below 80% area median income, 50 to 80 nominally, but at 50, it is so low that you just, so for a family of 4, that is roughly 30 to 50,000, that bracket. You can think there are a lot of jobs here in Moscow that pay in that bracket. If you have a family with only one wage earner, there you are. But 30,000 when you go to the bank doesn't get you much loan. 50,000 will get you a loan, maybe up to 200,000 or so, depending on your indebtedness, depending on your credit score, sort of other factors. My board is thinking that we need their loan, the buyer's loan, to be about 165,000. And that how can we supplement from 165 to 185, where the market is for the kind of least expensive real choices out there. And our way of being involved is to either buy the house and rehab it or build it new. We're not just a financial engine. But in either case, as we sell it, we leave behind a second note, which is Uncle Sam's money. 0 interest, 0 payments. So that fills some of what they call the affordability gap between the 165 buyer can actually borrow and something else that is the price of the house is a second loan that fills that affordability gap, we hope.
And then it comes due if the house, if. the
Comes
unit's
due
never
on
sold.
sale,
Yeah.
right. It feels more like a mechanic's lien, it's just waiting out there.
Yeah.
Must be owner occupied. The problem we're struggling with is, so I'll give you a bar graph, that's the buyer's capacity. Now, there's the buyer's capacity. There's the fair market value. And the construction cost is sitting up here. So I have the potential to lose money there and have to figure out how to fill that gap to get from the construction cost to what the buyer can actually pay. And that was the conversation last night at the board meeting, is how much money are we willing to lose on our next project? Which means how much grant money do I have to go out and find? How confident is the board that I will find it, or do I have to find it all first? You know, it's a
And did you find contractors that are willing to work for a 10% profit? I thought it would be closer to 20.
So you can quibble all the numbers in that
No, I'm
spreadsheet.
just, yeah, that was one that was sort of like, what?
The first house we did, I served as the general contractor and hired, it was a rehab and I needed some
Right.
sheet rock work and some plumbing work, and I just hired all those pieces. The second house, we went out to bid, found a contractor, and I think he put 15% on the project. So.
So you just have to save all your money and wait for the next crash when everybody's
Yeah.
desperate.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I guess it would depend on how busy they are, or what cycle we're in with, and interest rates are the other factor that,
But all
You
the
never know
pieces
what to-
that go into
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
right.
so,
I mean,
So-
yeah, that's what it sounds like is, oh, go ahead, sorry.
That's okay. No, so I was just flashing back on the Syringa presentation I went to and talked to Tom Lamar afterwards. And I had also gone to I think you were at the climate summit that was on campus. Container houses, I think they were quoted around 60,000. Now you're not building, you're slapping one down. How does that fit into the picture?
I think they might be able to be modular houses. So if put on a real foundation, then they could be real property. So the 60,000
Versus
is
the 80.
the thing. Now you gotta truck it here, and you gotta have a foundation.
Yep, you gotta
and
do
you
all-
gotta do all of that underground
Yeah.
stuff.
Because
So-
he was thinking at least 100,000 by the time you were done.
Right.
well, I've had students over the years look at containers for many years. You don't get much with a container, you know.
No, it's like that.
What?
hotel
The
suite.
shell is one thing, it's the interior finish work and the infrastructure that really drives the costs up. So I just have never thought they make sense personally. I mean, after watching many iterations of designs coming out of them and what has to go into them to make them work, so.
Yeah, framing is not the expensive part.
No, you have to insulate them, you have to get windows in them, you got it, and that's just the envelope, then you gotta get a foundation and all the finish work.
Probably get some
I don't know.
angry neighbors if you went and dropped them down
Oh,
in
yeah.
most any subdivision.
Oh,
in
yeah,
town,
yeah,
too.
yeah. I mean, you see them if you go down to the Panama Canal, you see them stacked up to the ceiling, and you think, look at all these containers that are available in the world that aren't. But I don't know. In this climate, with insulation needs, et cetera, it would be a tough one, I think.
But what I was gonna say, what it sounds like to me is that, first of all, it's questionable if there'd be a market for tiny houses at the price it looks like,
Right,
They
at the
could
price
show up.
point that appears, right.
which means that if we wanted to encourage it, there would have to be some major zoning
Incentives,
work
Right.
to cut as much of the cost down as possible. And
I don't
even
think
then-
it's just the cost. I think of, when looking at it as example of having to wipe out, have just a continuous curb cut of
Yeah.
parking, to me is pretty offensive. If that went into my neighborhood, I wouldn't be happy.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I think we would really have to rethink, how you mitigate that. I
Right.
think that we're gonna get into it with the shared reading, but I think the Spokane cottage housing starts to address those issues so that
Yep.
these developments can be inserted in neighborhoods and be more compatible with their surroundings, so.
But that's like
Yeah.
one of the first, is that if
Right.
you're 400 square feet or less, you only need one parking spot.
That might, right,
Right,
there might be
right.
some.
Yeah.
The Spokane ones, my reading of those diagrams, they all had private space and common space on
Yep.
those lots. So they
Right.
had to be some sort of a larger scale
Right,
development and
right.
then.
By right, though, not as a PUD.
By right,
Yeah.
you could go in and, you didn't need
Yeah.
the PUD, you could go in and do it, but it would end up being a condoized or some other kind of collaborative ownership
Well, it
with
seemed
the
like
HOA.
some of them showed property lines going,
Mhm.
being parceled out, so I don't know if it
Right,
was.
but still
yeah.
common space
Yeah.
and HOA kinds of needs and, yeah.
Well, thank you, Nils.
You bet.
Anybody else have any last comments, or?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, the majority, I think the tiny home inquiries we get these days are mobile home type configurations, like a mobile home park, because you have the looped utilities that go through there. I think one of the, as you showed, the kind of the larger impediment, or I guess partial impediment is the city utility fees, and you go into a mobile home park, I mean, they're already established and none of those really exist. You need to connect, but it's already been, established. And what do you think it would look like? Obviously there's we have PUDs, the Green Acres and Tiempo that have gone through, the PUD process to get those smaller, private streets, smaller lot sizes, reduced setbacks. You think it would work with these tiny homes if you did that type of configuration, only with, kind of a hybrid mobile home park, only with tiny homes, private streets? I mean, you start to increase density and maybe reduce the parking requirements.
Would it be different than, it wouldn't be a mobile home park in that it would be real property,
Yeah.
but in many respects, it would otherwise be the same as a mobile home park.
Yeah, and that's, we have a lot of, like Palouse River Drive, a few mobile home parks that are slowly transitioning, and then we have, an issue that not a whole lot of people are buying new mobile homes to move in. They're wanting to relocate them, up Syringa. And you have this issue with if it's built prior to a certain date, I think it's 76 or 78, that you have to rehab it before you can move it in, and the cost of rehabbing is not worth it,
Right.
At that point. And so you have these issue with these mobile home parks that as soon as you move a unit out of there, you can't move it back in, and you can't,
You got a
if it's
blank
buyer-
spot.
Yeah, you've got this blank spot. So you're, dealing with all these vacant spaces that you're trying to fill, and you're looking at alternatives in order to fill those. So, attractive alternative, I think, to a lot of people is looking at a tiny home, to
Don't you-
move it in there.
Don't you run into a bunch of regulatory problems where it's not really a mobile home, so it doesn't fall into those rules? If you can move it, is it really considered a home or a house where it falls under all the house building codes?
Well, you have to have a HUD stamp typically,
Yeah.
but you can get certified through Division of Building Safety in Idaho in order to build these off-site and bring them on-site. Yeah, I mean, we would have to, I think that's one of the things we thought we'd look at is trying to figure out the different code restrictions of, you know, having people that, it seems like everybody wants to have something that's built off-site and moved on-site, and not necessarily build it on-site. And so you run into a whole lot of issues with state licensing when you do that. But we were thinking of, you know, possibly if it, you know, if the numbers would work out and you think people would take advantage of it to try to figure something out. Like the state of Idaho recently inserted tiny homes in their building code as an annex, you know, onto the building code. And so once that got approved and we adopted it, we would think about how that fits in with the zoning code and how we can facilitate maybe, you know, those type of developments. But I mean, you can do that right now. You just have to go through a PUD.
Yeah.
You know.
And in a current mobile home park, could you start making real foundations and real property?
If you went through a PUD, yeah. I mean, you could take, you know, a portion of a mobile home park if you want. You know, we had an owner recently, within the last couple of years, talk to us about that. You know, it's clearing out one side and was either thinking about maybe doing RVs on one side or doing tiny homes. And, you know, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be able to go through a PUD and you know, as long as the utilities were sufficient and everything for it in order to convert that. So, you know, that's an option we have right now without amending the code, is just to go through that PUD process. But
So if I can do a
Yeah.
brief foray off into the weeds, there's these things called helical screw foundations. Have you ever heard of those?
I think I've heard of it, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, basically it's this little machine, has a great big stainless steel auger with sections that bolt on. So you drive up to where you want to put in the foundation, you drive this thing into the ground, screw it down into the ground. It measures the amount of force it takes to screw it in, which gives you your load-bearing capacity. So you can just come in and screw in like however many of these piers you need.
And that's the same as helical pier.
Yeah,
foundation.
yeah. And then basically you have a thing on the top where you just bolt on your,
So it's a sonotube that's self-installing.
pretty much, yeah.
We did that at the Intermodal Transit Center.
Oh, yeah?
That was,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
helical
Yeah, yeah.
piers is what did. And I think some circumstances it's cheaper
Yeah,
than a
yeah, yeah.
regular foundation.
It works really well if you got weird topography. But yeah, how far away did the guy come from to put them in?
It was Geno Construction, so they were out of Spokane.
Yeah.
And so I think that they're the ones that did it. I don't know if they subcontracted that out or
Yeah.
they did it with their own equipment, but I think they're from
I guess it's
Spokane,
sort of
Coeur d'Alene area.
Yeah, sort of available around here.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, it was fun.
Thanks, guys.
All right, well, let's see, we're on to item 6, the use table ordinance, and that's Mike.
Well, I think last time we had taken a look at it, a few different ordinances, and legal had time to put it together in one ordinance. And before Victoria gets going on a whole lot of corrections, I've got a new version, but it's not in your packet. So this is, I just
You
wanted.
took really good notes in high school, didn't you?
Every commission needs a Hawkeye.
So yeah, it's pretty much, you know, what you had taken a look at last time. We filled in kind of all the ordinance things that need to be done, the recitations, the whereas statements at the beginning. And so this is, you know, pretty much, hopefully, the kind of the final draft ordinance. We had, like I said, we had gone back and corrected a number of kind of Scribner's errors that we had throughout it. So hope to provide you with a completely clean one next time. But if you have some things that you've caught, feel free to let me know.
Well, it may take a while to find.
Yeah, it turned out to be 93, 94 pages, so it was a rather big document. But part of the reason for that is just all the sections that we moved, that we
Right,
struck.
right.
And so that's really why it's so long. But And then, the use table and the bulk and placement regulations table, this is fit into the ordinance, but we'll have to format that so you can actually, the font's pretty small, but just the way the format of the ordinance is, we had to put it that way. And so when it actually gets inserted in the zoning code, I think we'll have probably in landscape format, so there are a lot, the ones you've been looking at up to this point will help being printed and everything, so. But yeah, I think that if everybody's happy with it, after you take some time to, look through it and, make sure everything's there, I'd like to schedule it for a public hearing here in, I think the first meeting in April, so.
Great. Yeah, it looks close. So. We've seen it a number of times, so, yeah.
Yeah,
So. Okay, any questions or comments? So you don't want to present anything to us?
No,
You've
this is
already gone
it.
through
Yeah,
it?
I
Okay.
think you've probably, over the last
Okay.
year, probably
Have you
seen
it more than once?
Seen it more than
Okay,
once, so.
I was thinking, oh, he's gonna have a lot of presentations.
Yeah, I just wanted to, it's everything we've talked about,
Right.
and if you have questions on anything, we'd be happy to go through it. And
Okay.
but yeah, it's nothing's really changed since we've talked about it last time. It's just
Yeah,
put it-
I didn't
put it-
see
put it in
anything
one-
that
put it in
jumped
one
out.
ordinance. So.
Oh, wait a minute, why did I do that? Okay, never mind, it was just, I was just correlating something with on the townhomes, townhouse developments with our shared reading, or that's what it was. I knew there was something in there. So no, I don't have any. Okay, well, and moving on to the last item on the agenda, shared readings. We pretty much covered our reading last time. Victoria, did you have anything you wanted to add? Because I felt like I cut it short inadvertently last time. And no, well, you don't have to have anything. It's just, or if anybody else does.
I did have a thought later on, not at the time, later on.
Okay.
But Ann had made the comment that when I was talking about the newer apartments getting, I said shoeboxed or shoehorned into the backyards of
Right,
the
right.
older houses. And you made the comment that, well, students figure they're only there for a couple of years, so if they don't like it so much, they don't care, or something like that. There's a lot of truth to that, but we put a lot of effort into developing town and gown relationship, and I want students to feel like this is home. I don't want them to feel like that, oh, well, it's just it may be a crappy place, or it may be okay, but it's kind of squoze in here, and I don't really want to relate to anything out there. I want a better vision than that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not also just the students who are going, well, I'm only here for 2 years. It's affecting the homeowners that are around them. And that's important too, because they have an investment in their home and in their neighborhood. And if we're trying to develop community, town and gown, or as in the density article talks about developing community, I want something better than just, okay, I'm looking out my window and I'm 3 feet away from the old house that's sitting right in front of me, and now they don't have any privacy either.
Do you know how many units are in the building you're talking about? Because I was thinking about what you said last time when I was reading the Spokane Cottage ordinance and thinking, would some development like that be inserted more comfortably in
Well,
a
you
type
got
of
a lot more
situation?
room- You have a lot more room in the cottage development type thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, before the meeting, I had gone, I'm over in that neighborhood, but I'd gone on the street on Almond or Asbury, whichever one it is, and just looked from the front, from the street. I can't go into the yard.
Right.
But you've got an older house with a little teeny tiny yard, and then the rest of the yard is a driveway with for a couple of cars, and then it looks to me like you got 3 or 5 feet before the new structure, which is right off of the alley, is right in its face, and then you're going down a dirt or gravel crummy alley, and you're doing a sharp turn to get your parking spot off of the alley, and you're doing all that off of 3rd or 6th, whichever way you're going to come in. And that, the buildings themselves, they look decent, but they don't match anything else, and it's just crammed in there. I mean, you can't get much more crammed than that. You might as well have connected the buildings, you know, and I don't want people to just live in their house and they don't want to go out. I mean, I don't know what the point of a lot of these balconies are. They look wonderful in architectural drawings with the topiary trees and the nice this and the nice that, and what they turn out to be is a bunch of tires and crappy old couch sitting out there and, you know, stuff like that, and it looks horrible, you know, so.
Well, it's like the poster child for how to not do density, because it's, you know, because
Right.
they're slapping in a cube,
Right.
they're putting in as many apartments as
It's what
possible.
gives density the D word.
Yeah.
name.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the bad word.
Yeah. I mean, I think the
Yeah.
lesson for us is that if successful density, once again, takes
Careful design.
proper prior planning, yeah.
And plan.
And not just meets code or
Right.
meets a
Yep.
PUD or
Meets
CUP or
meets
whatever.
economic incentives without any of the
You
other
know.
dimensions, yeah.
I can only speak to the ones I think you know you're talking about. I think they have 4 units in them.
I think they're 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looking from the back, you know. I walk down 3rd Street to get to my house and I see them and it just gets my back up because I don't like the way it looks.
Yep.
You know?
Well, I think one thing we need to keep our eye out for is I mean, that's what's gonna make or break development and Legacy Crossing is whether or not they're nice planned, you know, they can be high density, but whether or not they're nice planned units or if somebody gets away with slapping in vinyl cubes.
Well, if they follow the design guidelines right now, they can't really do that, right? I mean, it's
Not
pretty
in Legacy
prescriptive.
Crossing, no.
Yeah.
Are those
Yeah.
in?
Elsewhere in town, they
I mean,
can.
yeah, I mean, part of the,
Yeah.
part of what we had done to kind of address these was, if you recall, like our parking standards increase for the, you know, for the number of bedrooms over 4. So if they have a
Right.
duplex or a single family, once you get above 4 bedrooms, then you're required to have another parking space per bedroom over 4. And so that was the issue, is it was kind of more of a loophole in our ordinance where, you know, these are duplexes, but yet they have 5, 6 bedrooms per side. So it's obviously college housing, you know, rental housing where you have, you know, more in, but our definition of family is only 4 unrelated people. And so you have, you know, kind of this restriction on the number of people that can live there, but yet they're designed with 6 bedrooms in each side, which are obviously going above the, you know, number of unrelated people that live there. But it's hard to enforce, you know, I mean, it'd be
Yes, and
complaint.
you're likely to have 2 people per bedroom too, so.
Yeah, I mean, if you have significant other and you know, they stay over or whatever, you know, the arrangement is, then yeah, you can have a lot of people. And the primary issue for us, I guess, was the parking, you know, on street was getting taken up just because of not enough off-street parking as part of these developments. And so that's why we ended up increasing that over 4. I mean, you have a large house out, you know, in a neighborhood east of Mountain View, then you've got, you know, maybe you have 5 bedrooms, but you have a large, you know, 2-car garage and a large driveway that you don't run into any issues with that. It's only these you know, circumstances where you have this type of development at the rear of the lots and causing parking issues. So we had done that, but we had talked about, you know, usually they meet all setback requirements. It's just that we don't have an open space requirement when it comes to single family or duplexes. And you don't have ADA requirements either. So, you know, you really, and that's kind of the trend I think we've seen all over the country. Like Boise State ran into the same issue. So City of Boise was, you know, getting all these duplexes with 5, 6 bedrooms that are popping up around. And they're a lot less, you know, it costs you a lot less because you don't need to put ADA requirements in. You know, you don't need to have the inside of it meet all ADA, you know, door thresholds and openings, and you don't need to run ADA sidewalks from the public sidewalk to the building entrance. You know, you can have stairs going up to the front door, and it's really just, you know, and so the developers have figured this out, and it's not just here, it's, you know, quite a few other places. And
And what's Boise doing about it? Are they?
they had
that's not
actually
the-
did something similar to what we did. So we increased the number of off-street parking spaces. And I think that was, about it, is all they did. I mean, I think they have floor area ratios there that require, we get into multifamily development and there's a certain amount of open space that you need to have, but if it's single family or duplex, then you don't, there is no open space requirement. So you just have to meet setback and building code requirements. So like without additional fire rated construction, as long as it's 6 feet away from another structure, then that's, the standard building code practice. And so that's what they do, is set them back 6 feet. And so you just end up with, maxing out on the setbacks, 20 at the rear, 5 and 10 on the sides, and then 6 feet away from the other structure. And, it's certainly density. It's using
density
that,
without design.
It's density,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah. It's literally a code response.
Yeah.
It's what the code will let you.
The code,
It's just pushing it in every direction.
It's building and
Yeah.
zoning codes dictating
Yeah.
what the outcome is.
Yeah.
And, and so we talked a little bit about, what we could do to, I guess first thing is that a bad thing to have more density in these areas at the rear lots? Maybe not density per se, but maybe the design, certainly are affecting some of the, the neighborhoods. We could require greater separation between structures. We could require, a certain amount of open space.
But there's not any open space there.
Yeah.
And one of them is like a whole blank wall facing the house that's in front. And, you got driveway, old house. On the back where the new structure is, it's parking right off of the alley, hard right, hard left, right into their parking spot. It's
So just getting into even a certain percentage of permeable surface when you start thinking about stormwater management and everything else, it sounds like it's all maxed out.
It's all maxed
It's
out.
either roof or pavement everywhere. That could be one avenue to have a little more soft surface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's the problem, it seems like, it's when an older neighborhood is being overtaken by the
What I kind of feel like is happening.
density student housing, yeah. Because, nobody, I wouldn't want to live in the apartment forest over in Pullman, but, there are people that don't mind living in it while they're going to school. It's only when looking out your bedroom window, you see,
Well,
like
it's
I
the
say,
big,
the vinyl cliff. Yeah.
The big thing's the location. I think people can overlook, what they're living in as long, they don't have to buy parking passes. They can walk
Yep.
to campus, walk to downtown, you don't really
Yep.
need a car.
Walk home at night without getting a DWI.
Yeah.
Well, in a sense, that's why you want density, right?
Yeah.
So that you
Right.
can minimize your transportation needs, that people can walk and access shopping needs and get to campus. So it meets all the requirements, except for it just looks bad.
Looks bad. And
It doesn't have to look bad, but it does.
Right.
But it does in the
And
examples you're
it
citing.
doesn't generate any sense of
Yeah.
community. You don't,
Yeah.
the blinders are on, they're
Yeah.
going from point A to point B, talk to somebody. I like to talk to students. I want to know what they're thinking and what they're doing. What are you studying these days? And not just blinders on point A to point B. I want a sense of community,
But the market kind of drives.
I know the market drives all that,
Yeah.
but I don't think it has to.
This is just an observation. I have no data to prove this, but it seems like there are fewer parties in our neighborhood now because there are fewer backyards. So people end up. People used to have barbecues and they'd be kind of loud and rowdy, and then now it is just what's your house, and so.
But those patios get parties.
True. The frequency seems lower too.
Yeah, but there used to be people on the patios you go back in.
You're just old enough, you're going to bed earlier.
Other points or?
Well, Victoria, when I'm king.
Okay. Yeah. I was looking at the Spokane. Any comments from the Spokane cottage housing ordinance, or did anybody have a chance to look at it?
Well, the thing that strikes me is that you certainly could do this with a PUD. I mean, we have some similar PUDs. I think if you had an R4 zone, you could certainly do this, but it, begs the question about division of property. We have kind of this restriction that requires each lot to have a certain amount of frontage on a street, public street right away. And so, I don't know, it has some advantages, I guess it has some disadvantages, and part of that is, I think you end up with higher property values, maybe a better, neighborhood, more owner-occupied units if you have real property, they're divided. And so, if we wanted to look at, step at trying to allow people to do this type of thing by right without going through a PUD, that would probably be one thing to address, would be that requirement that each lot has to abut a public street. I mean, if you look at the diagram, they've got kind of these islands, that are separated, as long as there's some type of access, access easements. Obviously, they've got some type of pedestrian easements through the other properties in order to access this, and common areas and things. So I think that, that'd be the primary prohibiting factor in this type of thing, just by right, is just that requirement in the zoning code. We talked a little bit about that in like the area city impact, on Polk Street. You have a lot of these fragmented lots, but they're pretty large. Yeah. And then they have this large area, usually a lot of them are really large, and they're deep, but they're not necessarily that wide. Yeah. And so, you end up trying to, and they're, fragmented, and there's not a whole lot of, there's a bunch of different property owners there. Yeah. And so, I think that we're going to start running into issues, at least on North Polk, about, people being able to divide off, a rear of their property with fighting this, public street frontage requirement, and why, if they had an access easement across there, why you couldn't use the access easement and still divide the property in the back. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that maybe that's something worth looking at.
Yeah, I can be the poster child for that, because, our chunk is designed for being cut in half on the long, skinny lot, and it is a pain to have to flagpole it down. There's a lot of stuff in the way.
And then we prohibit the length of flagpoles. The maximum's 150. Yeah. And you look at a lot of these lots, and the houses are pretty well set back, or they've got outbuildings, behind that.
How deep are the lots typically that we're talking about?
Oh, well, mine's 3 1/3 acres, and it's I want to say like 150 feet wide.
Yeah, you're talking probably 700 feet deep. 600,
wow, 700. Yeah. So you almost need another street grid going through there or something. Yeah.
Not much left if you put a street in 150-foot width.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm talking about laterally or whatever. Cutting the depth half.
But also, I think the direction things are going with the automobile is that, 20 years from now, it's going to be no hesitation that people buy lots with no street access, because, you summon up your driverless car and walk the 50 yards out to the street to pick it up. But whether or not we, jump into that now, how far ahead of the game we're going to be, we could be far enough ahead of the game to cause some serious problems. But I think that's the direction it's going. I'm guessing that the whole fronting on a public street is an automobile-based requirement.
Yeah, it primarily to ensure that there's access into the future, for those lots, and they don't become landlocked.
Yeah.
For the Spokane material we're looking at here, I guess I don't understand the Spokane jargon well enough to know the answer, but I guess my question is, what zones are these allowed as a use for ride-in?
Well, they're mainly, from what I take out of this, is they're either allowing them now or they're proposing to allow them in pretty much single-family zones. So you would have any R1, R2
Yeah.
that would allow, this type of development to occur. Which would, we'd probably get quite a bit of pushback.
Yeah, I was
if,
thinking NIMBY.
if we took a lot of the residential neighborhoods that are mainly just single family, R1, R2 that have been developed. I mean, we, had a little bit of pushback, I guess, with our ADU, and that's given that opportunity to those lots. We thought that from the surveys that were put out that, it was viewed more negatively in those areas of town as opposed to, closer to the core. But yeah, we ended up getting ADUs in all residential zones, so that was I think a good thing.
Yeah, that was one path towards densification and how many, but not many have been built. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably something else to talk about. I mean, we've had, just a handful that have been built, 3 or 4. And I think over the last year, we've gotten numerous inquiries, and the prohibiting factor has been the lot size.
Oh.
So in our ordinance, we had, so you need to meet the minimum lot size in order to be able to have an ADU. But you don't need to meet the minimum lot width, which, it was just primarily concerned about the lot size. And so, if we continue to see a number of people that are looking to do an ADUs, but that's the issue, is the lot size, then maybe we, disregard the lot size, or maybe it's take a percentage off of the lot size. So if you're required to have 7,000, in that zone, and you have, maybe we allow, as long as you've got 90% of the lot size requirement, maybe we do something like that. A lot of these
So
lots,
there are that many substandard lots? Really?
the majority of the ones are in older areas of town. They want to do it in their garage, and
The lots are
the
60
lots
or
are
55
60,
feet wide.
they're in maybe an R2 south of East City Park. They're in an R2 zone, which is 7,000 square feet, and they're all platted at 6,250.
Yeah, oh yeah, there are a lot of lots in that site. Yeah,
There's
they
a
were
lot of
parceled
lots,
out
yeah.
at that width all of
There's a lot of
historically.
lots that are substandard, especially in the older areas of town, just because, we've platted these lots and then zoning code requirements have changed, and then all of a sudden they become non-conforming.
Yeah. Mike, for my clarification, it's different, they're different width and size requirements depending on the zone, right, for an
Yeah.
ADU? Okay.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like our threshold is outside of what a lot of those neighborhoods were historically platted. The actual width of the lots were generally 60 feet, right? 55, 60 feet?
Yeah, it depends on where you're at. I mean, a lot of the older neighborhoods, like Elm and Asbury, they had 20-foot wide platted lots, and then you just took however many lots you needed to build your house. And so, I mean, we've got a number of them that are 40 feet in width in that area.
Now, Moscow's got really weird, I mean, most towns have more, if it was a railroad influence, it was 25-foot and 50-foot lots. We've got just all over the map.
But they're deep,
Yeah,
so they,
true.
even the 40-foot lots still meet the minimum 5,000 lot size because they're 125, 150 feet deep. And so, those wouldn't be prohibited from having an ADU. It's the ones that don't meet the minimum lot size that are the issue. And, but it's like the reverse, those ones that don't meet the minimum, they meet the width, but they don't meet the minimum lot size. So it's almost reverse of the ones in Almond Asbury area. So, I mean, and that's something to look at. I mean, it'd be a small tweak to make in our code.
And we'd have to go back through another public hearing.
We
to do
would, but
Yeah,
because
no,
it's an ordinance.
maybe it's worth
but-
it. Yeah,
but,
yeah.
I mean, if I mean, like I said, we've only had a handful since, and that's been about 2 years, 3 years.
Do you know
And
how many
so-
have been rejected because of the lot issue, lot size issue?
I know I fielded probably about 3 in the last year.
Yeah.
That's been the issue, is the lot size. So, and they, who knows how serious they were, but
Well, it doesn't make a whole lot of economic sense, as we saw from the tiny home construction. The cost of building something, I mean, people really need to be motivated with the reasons we intended for the ordinance to cover, like they have a relative who needs to live there or help, and it's not something you would do just speculatively or to try to bring in extra money, because it would take a long time to get to recover the investment costs. So. So it would be interesting to know what their motivations generally are for building.
Well, I mean, unless you're like halfway there with structures that are on it or something like that, because I do keep thinking of, this is a route to affordability. As if you can pick up another $500 or $600 a month off of ADU to help with the mortgage.
Well, and then there's been quite a bit of interest about ADUs and then using them as short-term, like Airbnb, type rentals. So, that'll be the next thing we'll be talking about is ADUs and short-term rentals, and so, maybe we can take a look at it as part of that process and maybe revise it.
Because if I remember right, there wasn't anything in the ADU ordinance about how long they're rented, is there?
No, I mean, it's just a question of, whether it qualifies as something else in our code, like a bed and breakfast.
Yeah, is this a business?
So,
Yeah, Joe?
With regard to the Spokane proposal, I guess the thought I had was that for a greenfield site, I would have no great problem with allowing these types of developments in R1, R2 even. Yet I think for existing R1 and R2 areas, the pushback would be tremendous.
Well, one of the things is there's
I
just
think
not that much infill land inside a lot of our neighborhoods. There's just not that much available even.
I figured that if my house burned down, I could probably fit 4 of these on there.
Okay.
As I said, I have an oversized lot.
Right.
But there was, I recall that there was some amount of debate about even having ADUs in R1. That there was some concern that maybe, R2, R3, R4, but maybe we should limit ADUs to not be in R1. I think the ultimate decision was that it was allowed in R1.
It's allowed everywhere.
But I remember, so your point, Joel, about some kickback, I mean, it's...
There was even kickback in the other direction that maybe we should allow them in R1 where they're on larger lots where they're cushioned from other people, but not in the, I remember the discussion going both directions, But.
So when I look at this diagram, it points out some of those issues that came up with the ADUs. So on the little diagram, you've got the one house on the far side that has a private, their backyard is not going to be very private because 2 little houses are looking right into their backyard. That was an argument that people had against the ADUs. The little house on the close side, it gets to sit next to nothing but a parking lot and park cars, and that's not typically what people want. The houses on the other side of the block, well, at least they have a yard. But then the other thing you're going to hit with the density is like, okay, how many dogs does each house have, and how many barking dogs are we going to get here? Instead of 2 barking dogs, I've got what? 13, because there's that many more houses here. And if you're a neighbor, you think about those things. When you're just looking at diagrams, that doesn't always come to mind. And it looks great as a new development, and there's a lot of cool things here, and at least you go into it knowing it.
Well, and I think, people, if somebody buys a 400 square foot house, I don't know, how big are these? 1,000 square foot,
For cottages.
up to
Yeah, they're bigger, it's 1,000.
800?
800, yeah. I mean, if
Yeah,
somebody
1,000.
buys,
800, yeah, 800.
The maximum detached footprint is 1,000,
yeah, you know, if somebody's buying stuff that small, I think there's some other motivation going with it rather than, you know, it's time for us to go buy a house. You know, they're looking for cheap, they're looking for, I mean, it's even possible you'd be looking at that as a planned community, because you gotta admit, it's got more community than the apartment blocks. But yeah, but I think it's not like the typical go buy a house in R1 sort of motivation for people to buy something like that.
Yeah, because I can see it's a great idea for retirement,
Yeah.
when you want to downsize,
You betcha.
you know, or just married, you know, you don't have a family yet.
Yep.
When you get a family, you're gonna get a bigger house somewhere else.
Right.
You're not gonna stay here.
Yep. And it's so cheap, you can buy the one next door for your grandkid to come take care of you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, this larger development, you know, like I said, we'd handle that through a PUD. You know, I was looking at the pocket residential development, which is the kind of the second, third, fourth pages onto this. You know, it's I guess it's interesting. I mean, we sort of have this similar arrangement in that, you know, if you look at the diagrams, the first one up at the top has more of this flagpole configuration.
right.
You know, and that's how we, you know, kind of limit density right now, is that, you know, that street frontage. So you have to have this flagpole that has to be 20 feet wide, can't exceed 150, and that's really the only way that you can divide off the back of the lot. And so you look at the diagram below that, and it looks like, you know, they're allowing kind of
Alley
this triple
access,
division,
yeah.
almost a triple division, and with these lots that don't have the frontage on the public street. And so, you know, whether or not that's a good thing to provide that option, you know, I mean, that'd kind of be the thing that we'd have to look at, is just that frontage on a public street issue, and whether or not, you know, these lots that have these large backyards that people are able to, you know, fit another lot on or another house on, whether or not that'd be a good thing to, you know, allow even more development, like Victoria's concerned with the, you know, existing areas. So
Then I wonder how much emergency access would you have to provide, things like that. I mean, it wouldn't have to be a regular public street, but you'd probably want some way of driving to every unit somehow.
yeah,
Well, you need to
it'd be at
there's
least,
some distance that the fire department has, right, from
yeah,
the public
it'd
street.
be at least
Yeah.
20 feet for the fire department access for the alley.
Yeah.
Usually you're limited at how tall you can go. So anything over 30, you have to have a 26-foot wide drive accessing it.
Yeah.
So, you know, fire code regulations really limit you for the height, you know, of a lot of these things, just
Yeah.
because of the width of the street that you need adjacent to it in order for them to put their outriggers out and,
Yeah.
and ladder truck access and everything like that, so.
I hate to do the broken record thing, but it's, you know, I just keep thinking about, you have a 4-car parking lot with the little common couple of golf carts, then, you know, you're done with your car, you tell it to go over and park at the East Side Mall parking lot, and just make sure you remember to call it up 10 minutes before it's time for you to go do something else.
Go park in Kurt's driveway. And,
No, that makes it mine. Yeah. But I, you know, just the level of change, if that actually happens, that it's gonna cause to city planning and zoning and all of that stuff.
Call up
Massive
Uber, you
sprawl.
don't need to worry about where it's parked.
Yeah, yeah.
It seems like. Interesting. Well, we exhausted this one, or do we want to do anything with it, or do we want to just table it?
I'd like to keep track of whether this ever gets approved in Spokane. I'm curious what the reception is or has been.
And I'd like to be able to go look at some of the developments that result from it, you know, and sort of see what they're like.
Road trip.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, it's out of state, so we don't, I don't know if that means we can do it under the, officially or unofficially. Anyway. Okay, well, I guess that's, the only last thing, I guess, is just be thinking about shared reading topics for the future, what you might want to entertain, and we have a public hearing in April, right, Mike? Probably the first meeting, and then what else is on the agenda coming up?
Next meeting, we have a subdivision, so it'll be a public hearing. So.
Okay.
Mike, did Nils give you his, he had two suggested shared, they're right up here, the strongtowns.org. Maybe we could get those posted. That would be an interesting follow-on to the discussion.
Yep.
I don't know if that would be something, even if we just put something out that said where they were, or what they were.
Yeah, we can go out there and take a look at them, and then
See if they're worth putting out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Towns and makes half.
I keep bringing it up. I wonder if there's anything written out there about the best guess for the future of self-driving cars. I mean, how long is it going to be before they're everywhere? Things like that.
Depends on who you talk to and who you read about, but some of it is coming into the mid-20s.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be an affordability issue for a lot of people for a long time, but everything I read leads me to believe that the early adopters might be able to get into this by 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Then as you get into 2030, 2035, you're probably going to see a little bit more. And there's a lot of automation in automobiles right now.
Yeah.
And it's, surprisingly, it's not used as much, but yeah. But you're right. I mean, you're going to have to pay attention to this because we could get behind the power curve real easy with something like this. It's interesting.
Interesting.
The scarier part's going to be when they start doing the aerial taxis.
Well, I think about those in New York City where they have those parking lots. It really solves their parking problem where they have those elevator, kind of parking stalls, so you get 6 cars in one spot. Vertically. I saw that in Amsterdam too. It was a new development, and we were walking around looking at it, and all of a sudden this guy drives up next to what looks like a guardhouse kind of thing, going into an apartment complex. And he gets out of his car, and his car goes, and it's basically an automated deal to park the car under the parking lot, under the surface street. So you don't even see any cars. It's great, and that's in Amsterdam. So what are they using to hold back the water that goes to this underground parking? And that was the other thing I would have liked to have known. But. Anyway.
I really look forward to my first trip down an interstate knowing that not one of the semis I'm weaving my way through has a human being at the wheel.
Apparently already happening.
Yeah.
Very, very, very hotly contested right now.
For sure.
Brutal.
Yep.
Yeah. And the railroads are, they actually probably don't need crew in them anymore, really, but
as long as they have positive, whatever the
positive train
safety
control
mechanism on there.
Yeah, anybody who's ever dealt with a computer giving you your power bill knows what could possibly go wrong.
Well, so you think about sabotage that could happen from whatever's controlling this whole system. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, we won't think about that. We'll just
on that note.